If you've ever wondered what a reverse diet means or what a reverse diet is, this episode is for you. Today, I get a chance to interview Noah Lee. He works under Layne Norton and Holly Baxter in the company Biolayne. He is a coach for them. And today, we get a chance to talk a little bit more about how he coaches his clients and how he implements a lot of these strategies on nutrition to help them achieve their fat loss goals. Hopefully, you enjoyed this episode with Noah. We'll see you guys in the next one. Hey guys, welcome back to the Nutrition Blueprint podcast. I get the chance today, as you probably heard in the intro, to have Noah Lee here in the podcast today. What's going on, man? How are you?
Hey man, thanks so much for having me. Looking forward to it.
I am looking forward to it as well, man. I love, I've been reading a lot of like really what you do, but I think and we're going to get into a lot of like the details and a lot of the really interesting stuff we're going to be conversing today about. But before we kind of get started into that, why don't you kind of like tell people a little more about who you are and what is it that you do so they can kind of get to know you a little bit better as we kind of get started into this combo.
Yeah, so I probably don't have to say my name because you guys have probably already heard that. But so I go to the University of Tampa. There I study human performance with a concentration in exercise physiology. And mainly what I do, I work for Dr. Layne Norton and Holly Baxter here, which is in Tampa. You know, those are two pretty big heavy hitters in terms of, the flexible dieting, educational, evidence-based type deal. So I've worked under them since about 2018. I basically started off as an assistant and then kind of just being around that, working, interacting with their clients. They've kind of been my mentor leading up into me being hired on by them as a coach. So now I work with pretty much a whole wide array of clients, from people that want to, get stage lean, do a bodybuilding show. And then just, I know the term is Gen Pop lifestyle clients. So yeah, I work with a wide array of people, definitely have gained some practical applications over the years and whatnot.
Okay, that's awesome, man. But I know like before even all this, because I'm actually kind of curious. I was actually reading through your bio, and I know that you're a former or current athlete. Not sure, like and it's funny. I don't know if you kind of like see my little putting green back there, or like my little
Oh yeah,
putting thing in there. But I saw that you play golf, man. So
that's the
is
perfect putting mat.
Yeah, it's a perfect putting mat.
Yeah,
I just got it. It was a gift, right? So it's like, overpriced little putting mat, but it was like somebody gave me. But yeah, I've been playing like for maybe like a year now, just for fun, just for shits and giggles. But yeah, so tell me, like, I guess like the background. So like how does like an athlete or somebody that is like so focused more on like, that kind of area, like gets into, again, performance, and now into nutrition coaching? Is that something you wanted to do even before then?
Not even close, man. So it's funny. So growing up, golf was by far my first love. I wanted to be a professional golfer. I was good enough to get a scholarship to a small D2 school up here in New York called Lemoyne College. And then, if anybody listening is from upstate New York, they realize that winters here are really harsh. So I had to get out of New York. I just wanted warm weather, more sun. So I was kind of, one Christmas break, I was just looking and I was like, I don't have enough time to get a scholarship to a team down south, but like, I want to get out of here as soon as possible just because I'm, sick of it. So the University of Tampa was the only Division II college golf team that allowed walk-on tryouts. So without needing a scholarship. So I was like, hell, I'm going to pack my bags, go to UT. Even if I don't play well enough to make the team, then I'll still be going to UT. And at that time I was studying finance. So I ended up coming down here to UT. I play well enough, thankfully, to make the team. I played for the team for a couple of years, and towards my last year of playing for the team is when I met Layne and Holly. And when they hired me, I was still a finance major. And now I had a pretty good working knowledge from, teaching myself, nutrition, exercise science and stuff. But yeah, I mean, at one point, Layne kind of came into my office and he was like, hey man, like, when are you switching your major? Because it's just, I was so far into it. And I was like, you know what? I was just thinking about that. So yeah, it was pretty fortunate that they would take me on, even though I wasn't specifically studying that, and I made it known to him, like, I don't really have intentions of doing so, but it's funny how life works out.
Yeah, man, that's crazy. It's an interesting kind of like turn of events, and I'm guessing this is now you're kind of like finishing up, I guess, like your bachelor's in exercise science and performance, right?
Yeah, yep, finishing that up, and then kind of deciding. I mean, Tampa's a great area because we have the Masters of UT, which you can complete in 1 calendar year, Masters of Nutrition and Exercise Science, I believe. And
Hmm.
then also, I mean, USF is right there too, which is a fantastic exercise science lab under Bill Campbell as well. So
Yeah,
definitely a
man.
little bit of thinking to do.
Yeah, no, it's a great place. I'm glad that we're both here, definitely because of
Mhm.
all the different things.
Yeah.
That's awesome, man. So why don't we kind of like dive a little bit more into like sort of like the how to I'm trying to kind of figure out where we kind of like take this conversation. And I think we can maybe kind of start from the beginning when it comes down to nutrition coaching, because there are different methods, there are different things that people do, and I feel like obviously you being a trained under Lane Norton, you've definitely learned like that evidence based approach. So why don't we start from like maybe like talking a little bit more about like assessing your clients when they kind of come into your program, and I like to think about assessing clients' metabolic health, right? So, what are some of the things that you feel are important for you to know when somebody applies? Or like, hey, no, I want to work with you. I want to like, my goals are just simply to kind of get super lean, not necessarily like a stage lean. And we'll talk about the differences between really what it takes to kind of get to that point versus just, I just want to like look great, when I go to the beach. But I'm sure like there are some things that you guys still do, like when you're assessing a person, into obviously depending on what they're going to do. So what are some of the things that you feel like are important for you to start to look at when you're working with a client that's starting off from the beginning?
Yeah. So you mentioned starting off from the beginning. So one of the first questions we ask, or myself specifically, is, do you have any experience tracking macros, tracking calories, or just dieting in any type like that? We'll ask, have you worked with a dietitian or nutritionist before? So if somebody comes to me and they have never done anything at all, the first thing that I'm going to really want to know is, have you lost any significant amounts of weight in the past, however many months or something like that? Because one thing that I've found is that a lot of people come to me thinking that they're experiencing, quote unquote, metabolic damage, when in reality, they've just never been as consistent as they think they need to be with monitoring their caloric intakes. And another thing that people, forget, because a lot of people are so hell bent on, eating right, getting the good foods in, that their activity levels throughout the day are, shot. I don't know if I can swear or not, so
You totally
I,
can.
I can. Okay, yeah. So their activity levels are shit. um,
Yeah.
but yeah, so the main thing is kind of, assessing if they've lost a really significant amount of weight or they've been significantly lean within the past couple of months or something. Then that's where I'll mention it to them, like, hey, like, we may want to do a reverse diet and, just allow you to spend some time at some higher calories, even if it's not for physiological benefits. If you've been trying to diet and lose weight and you're in a bad place mentally, then spending some time at some higher calories, allowing yourself to make some improvements in the gym, is probably going to do better than worse.
Yeah. And I guess like there's a couple words and phrases that you kind of mentioned in there, which one of it was metabolic damage, which I think a lot of people are trying to kind of use that as a scapegoat for to just to simply say like, there's something wrong with me. And you're talking about like a lot of times, and I see that a lot. It's just like the lack of consistency. But the second thing also you mentioned is the word obviously reverse dieting, right? So let's just maybe kind of start from, because I think they're sort of connected in some way, shape, or form. So when you talk about metabolic damage, like what is like the reality, or let's just put it this way. So what do people think it is versus what is it really like, or what's like the true definition of that, like based on you, like you as a coach, like, when is it actually the expectation really what it is versus like the reality of like what people are not really experiencing or what people think it is, but it's really not. That
Right.
makes
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah. I get what you're saying. So yeah, I mean, even now, a lot of experts, they like, I really think they're against the term metabolic damage, because the reality of it, when you tell somebody something is damaged, they kind of get the ideology, like it's irreversible, like it's bad, it's not getting better, which certainly isn't the case. And this, this can happen, but there's a big misconception. So when people hear, and I'll call it metabolic adaptation, because in reality, that's more so what it is. But when let's say somebody does a fat loss diet and they lose a significant amount of weight. First up, you have to look at it like you're carrying around less weight. So the amount of calories that you expend each day is going to be less because your body's carrying less weight throughout the day. But a lot of people think when you lose weight and you experience this metabolic adaptation, meaning that calories that you may have been able to maintain your weight on, you'll now begin to gain weight. A lot of people think that this adaptation is coming from your basal metabolic rate decreasing. And for anybody that doesn't know, basal metabolic rate is basically if you were in complete rest, like if you were in a coma or something, that's the amount of calories that you would burn without moving a muscle. So, a lot of people think during fat loss diets, it's decrements to that, which it can be. There is some research to point that it certainly can be. But what I've found working with clients is that a lot of what is adaptive in terms of, your total daily energy expenditure is your NEAT. So your non-exercise activity thermogenesis, meaning that it's basically all the subconscious movement that you do throughout the day. Like me, I'm moving my heads, moving my hands, that adds up throughout the day, burns a lot of calories. And when people are in a caloric deficit because, their body is trying to conserve as many calories as possible, because obviously, your body doesn't know what's going on besides the fact that it's in negative energy balance. So your NEAT is likely to decrease. And a good example that I have from a practical application is I had a client that was pretty significantly overweight, and we were on a maintenance phase for a couple months, and she was consistently getting in about 9,000 steps a day. Well, we switched to fat loss, and based on the numbers and the calories, she should be losing, X amount of weight, a significant amount of weight, and it's not happening. So I'm like, And I noticed she stopped tracking her steps. Well, I get her to do that, and she's only getting in 2,000 to 4,000 steps a day now. So, I think a lot of what people think is what people think is the adaptive factor being basal metabolic rate. I think it's more so that subconscious movement throughout the day kind of decreases without us knowing it.
Yeah. And I think also really is the fact, like when you kind of have a lot of these like chronic dieters that just kind of go through like this, like, the detoxes and like the ups and downs and the 1,000 calorie like diets and different things like that. And like, did you ever find like, especially like, and I see this a lot in women, like when they come to you, and I guess like we can kind of plug in the whole idea behind reverse dieting, which is like, first off, they don't have a great relationship with food, so obviously they're just fearful of like increasing calories, right? So do you see that a lot, and do you see there's obviously an aspect to the whole idea that like, because I think a lot of times is like either they're probably not consuming, because that's the other that part, like I always like kind of like ask coaches, right, which is like I only consume 1,000 calories a day, and then you kind of have them audit the diet for like 7 days, and like you still see it's like 800, 900, 1,000 calories, and obviously they're struggling, and they say like I've struggled to lose weight. So a lot of times it's like me asking the questions, like, or asking myself, like, is this person really consuming 1,000 calories per day? Or do you think is also an effect, there's a reason which you're talking about, like maybe this person is barely even moving, like not doing anything like that, and perhaps she is consuming 1,000 calories a day, and because that's a part of it. What sometimes like it kind of gets puzzling for them, especially for women that have like that kind of like long history of like very very restricted dieting kind of processes.
Yeah. I think it's certainly in cases like that, which I definitely seen. I think it can be a combination of both, to be honest. And then from there, that's really where you want to get a client in a reverse diet and have them spend a significant amount of time at higher calories. And again, even not just for the physiological benefits, but for the psychological and mental benefits as well.
And how did you, so let's get into like reverse dieting. So what is it? Like how did you define it, and what's the process that you get through, or how did you kind of like implement it with coaching clients effectively and smartly?
Yeah. So what a reverse diet is is it's basically a way to, so like we said, some people, when they diet, calories that they were able to maintain their weight on, they no longer can maintain their weight on. It's a lower amount of calories. So the whole idea behind a reverse diet is to incrementally increase calories in aims of, increasing that, I say metabolic rate, but in reality, it's increasing the amount of total daily energy expenditure for a client so that they can go from, not being able to maintain on the calories they used to back to being able to maintain on that amount while limiting weight regain as much as possible. Because, it seems what we see with these incremental increases is, the energy expenditure of a client tends to follow that. So calories are able to go up, and some people won't gain weight. Some people will gain a little bit of weight, but that's kind of within the expectations of a reverse diet, is a little bit of weight gain. It's very normal to expect that. And then in some cases, people, their energy expenditure will actually end up increasing beyond the calories that they're set at, and they could lose weight. So a reverse diet is an extremely individual case by case basis.
And how is it implemented? Because I think a lot of people have been, the one thing I would say about like people like Lane Norton and you and a lot of us that have been kind of preaching this evidence-based concept is a lot of times that they're just consuming a lot of the information that we're presenting, but a lot of times like they just implement it themselves. And a lot of times not doing it in the right way, I would say. So what is the proper way to do a reverse dieting? What is some like the do's and don'ts of that people should know about when they're starting a process like that?
Yeah. So by far, the biggest mistake that I see when, biggest mistake that I see when it comes to a reverse diet is somebody going on the calories that they're on, which is probably a deficit, and only incrementally increasing it maybe 50 to 100 calories from that mark, which you're still going to be in a deficit. You're not getting any benefits of this reverse diet at all. So the first step should always be taking your calories from, if you're in a deficit, to your current maintenance calorie level. And now this doesn't mean the same maintenance calorie level when you started fat loss, because like we said, it'll probably be lower. So you want to go and find this amount of calories that you'll be able to maintain your weight on. There are some, calculations that you can run. And then from there, once you're at that maintenance level, you want to, two big things that you want to monitor are your weight trends. So in this case, you have to ask a client, like, or not even ask a client, but you have to, being a coach, you have to use your intuition. Like if a client is coming off of a contest prep, they are unsustainably lean, then you're going to want to initially have that rate of allowable gain be larger, because they just need to put on a little bit of weight to get back within a healthy physiological range. But let's say it's somebody like myself. When I did my last fat loss diet, I only dieted down to like, maybe 10 to 12% body fat, nothing that was crazy by any means, but I probably did experience some metabolic adaptation. But during my reverse, I wanted to be a bit more conservative because, I wasn't in a rush to get back to a healthy body fat range. So then kind of once you figure out what that allowable, rate of gain is per week, then you can kind of determine how incrementally you want to increase the calories. And generally speaking, for most people, a calorie increase will look like anywhere from 3 to 5, 6, 7%. So, I mean, in some cases, it could be 50 calories. Some cases, it could be 150 calories. Kind of all depends on how your weight's changing from week to week.
Now, but you're talking about like anywhere between 50 to 150 per week, increasing incrementally up to their goals. And I guess like sometimes like would you see, and I'm sure this is again super like individual by person, but are we talking about like an increase sometimes is 500 calories like eventually to get to that point, or we're talking about sometimes even further like 800, 1,000, 1,200 calories above to the lowest level that you were originally?
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, during the initial bump up from your deficit to what your current maintenance is, that for most people will probably look like anywhere from 300 to 600 calories, which a lot of clients to me, when I give them that, they're like, whoa, hey, like, this is a lot of calories. I'm just going to gain weight. I'm like, okay, well, then follow this. And if you gain weight, then, I need to make adjustments as a coach. But generally, yeah, I mean, some people from the lowest point that they were to get back to their starting maintenance, it could be, yeah, anywhere from 800 to 1500 calories. Now, obviously, there's the 130-pound versus like a 230-pound person, which is going to be a big difference. But yeah, it can be a pretty darn large swing in calories.
And I guess like this is the other part too, because I guess it depends on the level of experience. And you earlier today you talked about like, you asking your clients or the people that come into your programs like, hey, have you ever tracked calories before and stuff? And you mentioned sometimes like you may even get people into like sort of a reverse dieting process. Do you believe is it's done they're doing it the proper way when you're talking to somebody that is like never track calories in their life, and you're just simply trying them to get to eat a little bit more? Like what is like, how do you kind of implement that, or you don't even touch the term reverse dieting, or you don't even kind of like bring it up until like that person has a more of an understanding on really what tracking is and how to do it properly?
Yeah, so yeah, I probably won't bring it up until, because if I have somebody that's never tracked before, they could tell me that they're not eating this or they're barely eating anything, and then we can find out that they're eating quite a bit more than they thought. So my approach to that is basically I'll run some type of calorie equation to get some understanding of, based on their body weight, based on their biological sex and activity levels, this is a range in which they should be able to maintain their calories. So I'll probably start a person like that off somewhere within that range, work on them to get consistent with tracking. And then most of the time, I'll find that they'll end up maintaining their weight. And if that's the case, then, it's pretty much green light to be able to start a fat loss diet. But, if something odd is happening with weight, like I put them on these calories and their weight is shooting up, then yeah, that may be when you want to consider a reverse diet. But the main thing is, the first couple weeks, a month, getting somebody consistent, getting their intakes, getting them to track consistently, because if they're not, then you really can't do your job at all as a coach.
I just think like, yeah, a lot of times they run into that issue, which is like, people when they feel like, or when they get that, they get this idea of like, oh, we're going to start implementing reverse diet and you're going to start eating more and different things like that. Like in a way, sometimes like they feel like, oh, I can just be a little bit more loose around like my tracking and stuff like that. When in reality, this is a time that they need to be more detailed about it, because you're incrementally doing kind of like adjustments and changes. I mean, at least that's the kind of like way that I see it. And I would love to kind of get your thoughts on that, because when you're making like a 50 to 100 calorie increase, I mean, like 100 calories is like, like 1 to 2 tablespoons of peanut butter, right? Like it's not that big of a difference. And a lot of times, like when you're not really like detailed and specific, like, it's really hard for you as a coach, I would imagine, to make adjustments if the person is simply not being compliant. Is that something that sometimes you run into when it comes down to like going and getting those clients to kind of go through that process?
Yeah, I think sometimes I'll even tell clients like, hey, like fat loss is done, you've done the easy part. Being able to successfully do this reverse diet, that is what really is going to impress me. Because if you think about it, and I know Lane Norton says this a lot, but I believe after, in one study or review, I forget what he says, but after 3 years, people who have lost significant amounts of weight, about 95% of those people will put that weight back on. So that goes to show almost anybody can lose a significant amount of weight in their lifetime, but being able to, do something to keep that weight off, that's the tough part. And another thing that I don't think a lot of people realize is, you know, even with being at maintenance, or being slightly above that with the reverse diet, you're still probably going to be a little bit hungry. You're still probably going to have to practice cognitive restraint, be mindful with your foods, which is tough for people because they think, hey, like I've already done the fat loss. Like I don't need to still be doing this, which, is
Yeah.
not a good recipe to have.
Yeah, it's a mentality. It's like I'm done, like I got to my goal, but it's like now, like what do I do now? And I think that a lot of times, I guess, it's people don't really understand really that process well. And I guess like how do you have these conversations with people like that? Like especially like with the whole reverse dieting, when you're getting to telling somebody that has like this, like the first they come to you and like maybe they have a history of tracking, so they know, but for a fact they need to be eating more. Like two questions. Number one, how do you have that conversation with them so they don't freak out about it? And number two, like, what's the timeline that you present to them? And for people listening as well, like, so they understand that this is not like a couple week thing. Like, it's something that you have to be comfortable implementing for a specific amount of time. So yeah, so those are a couple questions I wanted to ask you.
Yeah. So with with having that conversation with a client, and I'll even preface it before we start a fat loss diet. I'll say, hey, like, we're gonna do this fat loss diet. We're gonna lose a significant amount of weight. I do want you to be prepared to, if you're gonna be working with me still, we're gonna be undertaking a reverse diet after to help you, maintain as much of this weight loss as possible. Now, obviously, this depends upon the client, because if this is somebody that's getting pretty darn lean, then, that conversation will be a bit more like, hey, like, after you get lean, we're going to have to, this will be an unsustainable level of leanness. So we're going to have to be comfortable with putting on a few pounds after fat loss just to get you back into a healthy range. But if it's somebody that's dieting down to, a normal body fat range, nothing crazy lean, then yeah, I mean, I'll kind of preface fat loss by saying that, or I'll tell them, I mean, you can do what you want moving forward, but I can't really promise you that you're going to be able to sustain this, weight loss as best you can, unless we, continue to be consistent with a reverse diet.
Yeah. And I guess like another important kind of like point here is, as far as like the time frame that may take.
Mm.
So is this like, are we talking about like a month? Are we talking about like 6 months? Like when implementing a proper reverse, so people understand exactly what it takes and how long does it usually take. Again, super variable, I'm sure, depending on the person, but an average, like what do you usually kind of like, how long do you usually kind of get people to go through this process for?
Yeah, so I would say a very general recommendation for somebody that does fat loss, and then, we'll ask how long it takes to reverse. Generally, it's about the amount of time that you spent in fat loss will be the amount of time that it takes to reverse diet. Now, I've seen extremely fast reverse diets, and I've reverse dieted clients for like 8 months before. So it's very dependent. I've seen, so many different things with the reverse, and that's why it's tough. I mean, that's why my bosses Lane and Holly have a book on it, a whole book on reverse dieting. But I would say, very generally, you're going to want to expect about as much time as you spent in fat loss, needing to go towards reverse dieting after.
And then going back to that, then to that, the fat loss phase, because I think like I always like tell our clients is like, your body's just not meant to be losing weight 365 days of the year, right? Like, your body fights that. Evolution teaches us that your body doesn't like to lose weight. Like, it kind of goes against, like, what our natural, like, kind of body's course and really what it wants to do. So what do you feel is like a smart like period of time where people should be okay, like calorie restricted diets or calorie restriction, calorie deficit, and before obviously it becomes like a little bit too much of a burden psychologically, metabolically speaking? What is the sweet point where you feel like it's ideal for you?
Yeah, again, this is tough to get general. But yeah, it depends on how much weight somebody has to lose. Like, I have a client who was probably 50% body fat, and we've been dieting nearly every single week of the past year. And, they still feel great. I mean, they're still at a higher body fat percentage. They've lost, 80 pounds. Um, but with having that much body fat to lose, it's more realistic to spend that longer time in a deficit. Now, as far as how many weeks for somebody that's at like a normal body fat percentage, how many weeks it takes to lose weight, I think most people in their minds have it ingrained anywhere from like, 8 to like 16 weeks. Generally, I would say that's kind of what a normal fat loss diet takes. But again, it totally depends. And now we have, I know you mentioned it previously, but we have the new kind of tools in the toolbox that are diet breaks and refeeds, which can also, if you're doing a diet break every second or third week, that can make the technical time in a diet almost half as long. So Yeah, again, totally depends.
Depends.
Yeah.
So diet breaks, and this there's a study. I think this is was this like from USF, like from was it from Bill Combo, like the Matador story study, which is like the one that was like, one of the biggest kind of like more eye-opening kind of like studies on weight loss that I have seen, which talked a lot about like, a couple groups of people. They put them to do a diet for 16 weeks, and one of them just calorie restriction all the way through the 16 weeks. The second group, they put them 1 week on it. I think it was like 1 week on calorie restriction or two, and then it would follow by like a diet break, which, it's essentially like bringing their calories up to maintenance.
Right.
So I know that was a very prominent, like, research, like set and research data that came out, and the kind of like started. I know Lane is a big kind of proponent on this. So what are diet breaks, and what's like the science behind implementing that and how to do it?
Yeah, so the Matador study, I think, was done in New Zealand, but the one you're talking about in Bill Campbell's lab was the refeed study,
Okay.
which is kind of like the big refeed, the 2 day refeed study that everybody
Okay.
references. And then Matador, yeah, it was 16 weeks, I believe. I think it was one group was, straight through dieting the whole time. And I think the other group was 2 weeks on of dieting and then 2 weeks off on diet breaks. And it basically showed that, fat loss was a bit more efficient for the diet break group. They saw, I believe, less decreases in resting metabolic rate, which I know we talked about basal metabolic rate. They're kind of pretty similar. Um, so yeah, I think that, and then we also have a new study by Jackson Payos, which I haven't read, but from what it's been told to me, is it kind of showed that there wasn't as much of a benefit to diet breaks, which all in all, we need more data on because it's still pretty much in infancy of us studying this. So I think that, in terms of doing a seven, in which a diet break, by the way, is, if you're in a deficit, you're taking your calories back up to current maintenance levels for the week. And, obviously, if you're having more calories, you're probably going to feel better. Training in the gym's probably going to go better. So this is kind of what hypothesized people to say, if you're training better, feeling better, you're less catabolic during that week, then yeah, you very well could maintain more lean body mass. Weight loss could be more efficient, and you could experience less metabolic adaptation. So I think that, to me, my ideology about that is there is a potential positive in terms of physiology, but in my eyes, there's a total positive in terms of psychology. Being able to take a client, give them a break from the gruels, the grind of a fat loss diet, kind of letting them go back to maintenance, eat some more foods they enjoy for a week, have some good training sessions, maybe even sleep better. And that kind of has showed to improve adherence, at least for my clients alone. So that's what I think is huge about them.
Yeah, no, we can kind of implement it as well, and I think but it goes back to the same thing that, diet breaks are not just, they still need to be accounted for. They still need to make sure that you're detailed about it. Like, you can eat more, but at the same time, like, if I think a lot of times, like, people consider diet breaks and they look at them as like, oh, it's like vacation week, right? And then obviously they just kind of go crazy. Like, we don't really know exactly how much they ate, what they did, and a lot of times, like, they just a lot of times, well, just create a lot of more like damage and actually kind of help them when they're not really doing it the proper way, which I don't know if that's something that you may kind of run into is sometimes when it comes
Yeah.
down to that.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is why I think it's important, and something that I've learned a lot the more that I coach and the more that I read research and whatnot is you can't really be married to one method of doing things. Yeah, I mean, like I myself, I I think now that I have diet breaks, it's, the best thing since sliced bread. I don't ever want to diet any other way, but there's still going to be clients who just aren't going to do well with doing diet breaks or refeeds. It's going to cause them to overeat throughout the week. They're not going to feel good about themselves. It just won't be a good situation. So you have to be able to remove yourself from what works as you as a coach, or even, sometimes what the research shows. I mean, if you read a study like the Matador and they're like, oh, like diet breaks are changing the game. But again, not every client's going to be able to flourish on that. So you need to kind of separate yourself from that and be able to, implement different types of methods. But yeah, I definitely think, and I've had clients straight up tell me, they're like, I don't like doing diet breaks. I don't want them. Can we just diet straight through? And for me, the research kind of being kind of in the infancy on the physiological benefits, I'm fine with. I'd much rather have a client be adherent the whole time versus throwing in a diet break and potentially messing up their, flow.
Yeah. Now, there's I think a few months ago, I kind of posted this art, kind of like a post on Instagram, which kind of like I termed it the cost of getting lean, right? Um, and you work with a lot of people that are just wanting to get leaner because they just want to look good. And we also talk, you also work with people that are just doing it because they want to, either whether it's to prove themselves or just to kind of compete, to do something like that is just going to kind of like require a lot of discipline. And again, I have a lot of clients that come to me and they want like that single digits, like body fat percentage. You got girls that are wanting to kind of have that like awesome bikini figure. And I think a lot of times that they just don't understand the cost of it and the sacrifices that it takes to get there and to stay there, and for how long can you stay there. So like how do like what how does that conversation a lot of times go for, even for clients that are not really going to be competing in like a stage, but they still want that kind of like level of result? Does that make sense? Like, did you ever kind of
Yeah.
like run into that? And like so what's the cost that they have to pay for that? And like, sometimes like how did you present that to them a lot of times?
Yeah. I mean, again, depending, I freaking hate always saying it
No,
depends.
but it depends. We're in the it depends like science, so
Right.
it totally makes sense.
Right. So, I mean, depending on who's coming to me, let's say it's somebody like a male that's, 25% body fat. He's just getting back into training or something. And he tells me he has some goals like that. Now, I don't like calling them lofty goals. But they're goals that'll get more realistic over time. So I'm in the department of being as, straight up realistic as I can. It probably makes me less money than I could, which, whatever. But, I'll tell somebody, like, hey, like, okay, yeah, we can do that, but are you willing to, be consistent for 5 years? Like, is that something you can commit to? Because and I made a post on this too, like in the reality, like day to day, you're not going to have to do anything that's, super extraordinary. Besides, the only extraordinary thing that you're going to have to do is be consistent with the small things for a really long amount of time. So that's kind of what I say. Now, let's say I'm talking to somebody that's already pretty lean and they want to get absolutely shredded for the stage. I'll tell them, like, okay, I'm sure that you can probably do this physiologically. I'm sure that, you can, because it's never a lack of willpower for people. But I want them to know, like, are you willing to, if you're a female, there's chances that you may experience amenorrhea or the loss of your monthly cycle. There's going to be decreases in libido. You're going to energy decreases, fatigue, stuff like that. It's going to suck. And then even, after, there may be some, problems with trying to introduce food. Maybe, you have a hard time switching that mentality into allowing more certain foods back into your diet. So really for me, it's all about being as upfront as possible. And I would much rather, I don't want to say scare, but like let the client know the reality. And if some of the things that I said might happen, don't happen, then hey, I look like, I look like a saint, I guess.
Yeah, no, but it's important conversations that I think people need to. It's what I tell all our clients. Like, my job is not to tell you what you want to hear. I mean, it's like
Right.
what you really need to hear, right? And I think it's like a lot of times like it's they just don't understand, like they don't set realistic expectations, or they don't really kind of have them because they don't really understand exactly what it takes to kind of be able to kind of get there. And it's a motivation piece, right? So it's like, how long can you kind of stick to that? And like, and we're humans. I mean, I was just like kind of talking to my wife the other day about this, is the fact that, dude, like a lot of times, like, especially when tracking, even myself, I know, because I've gotten leaner in the past, so I know exactly what it takes. And there's smaller things that we don't pay attention to that amount for so much on a weekly basis, because I think a lot of times people look at they don't really never see the bird's eye view, right? So they just only look like, oh, like I hit my macros today. Well, I don't care you hit your macros today if you're not really kind of hitting them consistently, for like 7, 14, like 21, like 30 days straight. And then you're definitely going creating consistency around it. You don't have to be perfect, but at least consistent in all that. So I think a lot of times it's just like people not understanding exactly what really consistency means when it comes down to nutrition, because it's freaking hard, man. So
Yeah. Yeah, I think with some people I'll say, you don't have to track macros your whole life. I mean, even myself, like if work's getting busy for me or something like that, like I spend a month or so throughout the year not even tracking. And I'll tell clients, like, if you want to do that, that's fine. But if we're going to complete a fat loss diet, or we're going to get real lean, then there's no excuses. You need to be consistent if you want me to do my job as best as I can.
yeah. Now let's talk about plateaus, because I think you probably run into them a lot with clients, and I'm guessing, like, I guess what I want to ask you is like, what are important like things that you start to look at when you get clients that are plateauing? And I guess like we can kind of talk about the compliant client, so the person that like they're like, Noah, I promise, like this is happening, and you're looking at those different things, and you're like, okay, like I like, a lot of times as coaches, we definitely would love to kind of be able to kind of see them peeking through the eye in their day to really kind of see what's going on. So you got the compliant client that is like, okay, something's happening, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, same thing. And then you got the non-compliant client that is just, again, quote unquote, he's like some success, but he or she completely plateau. So in those case scenarios, like what are some of the factors that you look into, whether they're separate from each other, or like there's some things that you look at the same exact things for both of them individually?
Yeah. So starting off with the compliant clients, first thing, I'll let them know it's totally normal to experience a plateau. Like, you very well could not be doing anything wrong. You're probably doing everything right. So it's normal that a plateau will happen. And that could bring about the longer conversation of maintenance calorie range and why we realistically plateau. But the first thing that I'll look at is kind of, obviously we need to create a bigger energy deficit to get weight loss moving again. So I'm going to look at three main things based on how I have my coaching spreadsheet set up. First up, I'll look at calories. Like, okay, if they're still on a decent amount of calories, maybe I'll decrease their calories, usually anywhere from like 5 to 7% of total calories, which for some people, this will probably look like, anywhere from 100 to 200-ish calories. But then, if their calories, they're hungry, I don't really want to decrease calories too much. Then I'll probably look at cardio, where do they have room to increase cardio? And I said three things. I really mainly meant, what I meant by the third thing was I separate steps from cardio for my clients. So I'll also look at their daily amount of steps, because this is kind of another, taking 10 to 12,000 steps a day as a part to 6,000 steps a day can be a pretty big difference. So I'll kind of look at all three of those and see what I can adjust to get them back into more of a deficit. And most of the time it'll end up being a combination of all three. So maybe a slight calorie deficit, a slight increase in cardio, and a slight increase in steps. But what I'm also going to look at is how much time of their week are we already eating up? If this is a mom of three and she's, doesn't have too much more time to add into the gym by doing more cardio, then I'm probably more likely to decrease her calories so that, it doesn't become unsustainable for her having to be in the gym 20 hours a week or something like that.
Did you ever look at, for example, things like maybe, and again, this is obviously a schools of thought talking about like hormones and stuff like that. And now you sort of look into things like, sleep and stress and those different things like that. Do you think a lot of times that has a big part to play, or not as much as people think it does?
Yeah, absolutely. I think sleep, first of all, I call sleep the best pre-workout that you'll ever take. But I do monitor my clients' sleep, and if I notice like they're getting, a couple 4 or 5 hour nights of sleep, it's very likely that their energy levels are going to be decreased or their energy expenditure levels are going to be decreased the next day, because, we've all been tired. And again, we might not even realize that we're moving less because of NEAT, and the fidgeting and stuff. So that's definitely something to take into consideration. And it's probably not so much of a lack of sleep is changing something physiologically like inside of you, which I mean it can, but it's probably more so that energy expenditure. But another thing to point out about sleep is that low sleep, we have seen, can increase the hormone ghrelin, which is kind of the hunger signaler. So it's very normal for people, like in studies, a restricted sleep group will eat more at free will because their hunger hormones are increasing from that lack of sleep.
Yeah, yeah, that's a really interesting studies. I think I have a book. I think it's called "Why We Sleep" by Matthew Walker, and he has a really good. He talked a lot about that. Like literally, he put two groups in, and like they sleep deprive them for like a week, and they put them into a buffet, and and see what happens whenever they're not sleep deprived, and they were consuming like 300 to 400 calories more, like the same people, just 2 weeks apart, compared to obviously when they didn't really have any sleep deprivation or so. So I definitely think it kind of has a lot to it. And I think we kind of like live in a society where people are just like chronically undersleeping and then chronically stressed. And it's just like the combination of things. But I think that if anything that is like kind of like the common denominator here is like, you just simply are conditioning your body to just eat more, whether it's emotionally, whether it's because of like you have hormonal changes that are just simply kind of spiking up your hungers. But at the end of the day, you're just all it is doing is like getting you to eat more than really what you really need to be doing. And I think that's where a lot of times like people kind of fall to see it. Like so they blame the hormones, they blame this thing, they blame all the different things, but the reality is all those different issues that you're blaming it on, that they're just causing you to eat more, right? Like I mean, that's kind of like the main idea behind that.
Yeah, man. So my girlfriend lives in Italy, and I went and visited her in Spain, and just like being there, and the more you can tell how much more America is like a busy driven society, lack of sleep. Even just being over there getting more sleep, it's like I feel a million times better, and it kind of makes you realize how much a lack of sleep is gonna f with you the next day. But yeah, anyways, that's my tangent.
No, but it's interesting that you mentioned that, because like in Europe they have this, the like it's people when Americans go there, like they get kind of like weirded out because from like 12 until like 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon, like everything is closed. Like nothing is being done because it's kind of like the time for like what in Spain they call it siesta. So it's like or
I didn't know
it's
that was real.
yeah, and other and he Italy, like they don't do anything. They don't do shit from like 12 o'clock till 2 to 3. And I grew up in Venezuela, so we still kind of have that. It was more of a shorter time, but like they're not doing anything. And then we kind of like start seeing a lot of these like populations in this like in different countries, in European countries and stuff like that. They're loading up on carbs like it's nobody's business, and but you don't really see the same kind of issues that you kind of like see here in the US. So it's
Yeah.
like it makes you think like and this is obviously when we kind of start to talk with people that are like the carbophobics, and like the people that are blaming the insulin model of obesity, which it's like carbs are really kind of causing the problems. And then you look at these populations and you're like, well, like I guess like they must be doing something right, because they're eating all the carbs and like really nothing is happening. So
Yeah.
yeah,
I just wish there was a bit more resistance training going on over there versus.
yeah. The bodies, yeah, the bodies of a European, they're definitely not the typical resistance type of training. But I think if you combine both of them, you definitely kind of get the perfect balance there.
Yeah.
So that's awesome. Cool, man. Well, we're coming to the end of the conversation. I think this is super, super impactful. Like the last things that I wanted to kind of ask you about were just like quickly kind of talking, because like I wanted to really dive this into into this as well, which was more like refeeds, which I'm guessing like refeeds. And you mentioned the study by Bill Campbell that from USF, that the 2-day refeed, and we implement that with some of our clients as well. But what are refeeds, and going back to plateaus, is this something that you sometimes like implement, and do you do it just to try to break a plateau, or more from the psychological standpoint, or a little bit of both?
Right. Yeah. So I know some people think about refeeds as kind of helping them break through a plateau. I think, do I think that it could, somebody could feel better and maybe increase their energy expenditure because they're feeling better, and that'll help them break through a plateau? Yeah. I mean, maybe that very well could happen. I've seen it happen when I do refeeds that aren't necessarily for that specific case. But again, I think refeeds, my personal use for them more so is for when a client's, they're real hungry, they're having a tough time mentally with dieting, or maybe training has been a bit lackluster. So stuff like that is when I'll do a refeed. And what I do for refeeds is pretty much increase calories for 2 back-to-back days to at least maintenance, maybe slightly over, but more so at least to maintenance. And I'm primarily going to increase carbohydrates.
Is there a reason for that?
Just again, because more people, more people tend to enjoy carbs, but also kind of from a training perspective, getting some more carbs in, maybe helping replenish glycogen.
Yeah. Okay. That makes sense. Cool. Yeah. We definitely, a lot of times, like, people ask the questions, like, and again, like, we don't call it, this is the part too, like, a lot of times, like, so is a refeed like a cheat day? A lot of times I get these questions like that. Right. So like, but then it goes back to like, it's like, well, at least that's why I explain. It's like, it's not like just like all out, like just, it's a control higher calorie day. Is that the way you also explain it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think cheat days are absolutely stupid.
Yeah, me too.
They incorporate guesswork into the whole equation when there absolutely doesn't need to be. I mean, during a refeed, you have more calories. You could very well eat freaking anything that you want, obviously within moderation, but like one meal a day, maybe that can be something like, that you've been craving for a while. And I'll tell clients like, hey, like, you've been thinking about a certain food or a food that you enjoy more, like during our refeed, hell, go have it. Like, if you find that'll help you continue to push on with fat loss, then I'm all for it. But be as consistent as you can. If you're going to eat out, try and guesstimate the macros as best you can. And it's only going to end up being one meal out of thousands of meals that you're going to eat this year. So just keep on moving forward.
Yeah. That's usually the best kind of like way to kind of approach that. So cool, man. That's awesome. Well, awesome. Great. We're coming up to the end of the podcast. And the last thing I wanted to ask you, we just kind of have some like, I like to do is like rapid fire questions, which is just more going to be like the first thing that kind of comes to your mind. You ready?
Okay.
Cool. So the first one would be, what is your favorite movement or exercise type that you like to do?
Mine is the barbell back squat.
Okay, love that. Second one would be, what is one book that you would recommend everybody to have? And you see here, I have a bookshelf that everybody should have on their bookshelf, regardless of what it is, nutrition, like anything.
Regardless of what it is, man, I hate to say it, but I'm not a huge reader. But for beginners in nutrition, I would say Fat Loss Forever. Kind of a shameless plug, but I don't really make money off of it, so I'm going to say that.
Okay, cool. That's the one by Lane Orton, right?
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. Is there a educational resource, or again, you can totally do a shameless plug here, YouTube channel, podcasts that you would recommend people listen to get the information? It could be, again, nutrition, motivation, or anything like that, that you think it's like worth like giving it a listen to, or giving it a go from people listening in.
I'm a big fan of the guys at Stronger by Science, Dr. Eric Trexler, Greg Nuckols. They have a very dry sense of humor, which is great for me. So, and they're
Awesome.
really smart.
Awesome. Last one would be, if you were stranded on a desert island and you would just have to pick one food to live off of for the rest of your life in that island, what would you choose?
Ooh, pepperoni pizza.
Okay, there you go. That's more than my alley. That's awesome, man. Noah, how can people find out more about you? Like, I know you kind of have you work through Biolayne, so I know they can kind of like get coaching with you. So, number one, how can they contact you? And number two, how can they work with you?
Yeah, so if you guys want to contact me, the best way is noah@biolayne.com. Shoot me an email. You can find me. My main social is Instagram, so @NoahDavidLee. And if you are curious about inquiring for coaching, you can go to www.biolayne.com/coaching and fill out a coaching questionnaire there.
Okay, cool. Do they need to select? Do they have like an option to select who they want to work with?
Right. There is a drop-down box. Definitely make sure you choose your boy.
Yeah, you choose Noah. Absolutely, man. Well, Noah, it's been a pleasure, man. Thank you so much for taking time at your busy day today. I know you got a lot of stuff going on right now up in New York, and we just want to thank you for being on the podcast, and hopefully the people in the audience that are listening to this, you got a lot out of it, and hopefully we'll bring you back in here to just kind of chat a little bit more about nutrition and all the topics that people
Absolutely. Anytime, man. Thanks so much for having me. It was awesome.
Thank you so much.
All right. See ya.